Everybody, and thank you for joining us for another library lunch hour coming direct from the Centro Library and Archives, located on 119th Street and 3rd Avenue in the Silverman School for Social Work. My name is Anibal Arocho. I'm the library manager here at Centro. I'm joined by my colleague.
Lindsay Whitworth, the manager of digital collections here at Centro.
And today we're joined by another special guest, Mr. Philip G. Swan from the Hunter College Archives, who's going to be sharing a little bit about the Hunter College Archive and its link to Centro. So what we really wanted to discuss with all of you today was, I guess, a dive into or a preliminary, I want to say it's a pretty big collection. So I want to say it's a preliminary look into what we think is one of the most exciting collections here at Centro, one of the most important collections to us, certainly. But I would say a collection that is important to anyone who's doing research into the ethnic studies or research into Puerto Rican studies or into how organizations come to be, how leadership gets set up within these organizations, and sort of the history of organizations. And that is I'm bearing the lead. The Centro records, the records of the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. So yes, among the over 300 collections that Centro has in its holdings are the records of the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. Lindsay, do you want to start us off by explaining a little bit about these Centro records and what do you think and why are they super important?
Sure. So what's really fascinating about our institutional records is that they, first and foremost, heavily document the founding of Centro and kind of the precursors to Centro, the foundational documents. Prior to Centro being the institute that we know it is today, there was a lot of ideas kind of kicking around in the late 60s, early 70s. A lot of professors and students and activists were really trying to formulate what an ethnic studies center would look like, a research for Puerto Rican studies, kind of establishing it as a place for research and what Puerto Rican studies would look like at CUNY. So we have a lot of that documentation that we have correspondence between the Ford Foundation and these preliminary groups, documentation between various CUNY units and CUNY Central and what would become Centro. One of the really things that I think is incredibly fascinating here in the Library and Archives is it has all the documentation about how the library got founded. We always talk about our libraries being, a couple shelves on a wall in a research room, and to see all the intentionality that went into building up the library to become a real established library within CUNY, I think is particularly fascinating, but also you see all that intentionality of, how are we going to organize? What's the leadership going to look like? There was tons of its student involvement, which I think is really fascinating. We have this all documented in the Centro records. And then from there, we have the documents and the correspondence between the different research units that we developed. Heavily documented are the early research units that were kind of the focal point of the first 20 years of Centro, as well as a lot of really rich collections of our oral histories. And it really, I think what's great about the Centro records is that it not only has all this documentation of like how an organization came to be and how it functioned and everything from like HR kind of issues come up and changing personnel. It documents the changes in leadership really heavily, and as well as all the various programs that we did. We also have the products of the research that we did. So we have almost all the oral history projects that we did digitize in our digital collections. I know we're starting to work on digitizing a lot of the reports that were the products that'll hopefully get linked into here. So there'll be increased access.
Absolutely. A lot of the when Lindsay refers to reports, it's the published reports that the different task force produce. So things about language acquisition, things about bilingual education, directories of Puerto Rican studies programs in the United States. Again, a lot of this material is most likely outdated. The scholarship has it's over 20, 30 years old. but it has historical value for the type of scholarship that was taking place at the time. And the idea is that we do want to make these publications available that are not available online anywhere. They're on our stacks behind us. But me and a couple of our interns are working to get that stuff digitized so that we can make it available. For those people that, some people just want to reminisce, maybe you participated in some of these task force and you were part of the production of some of this scholarship, and you want to see, we can make these available now, digitally, free of charge to the general public. So Lindsay, you talked a lot about the administrative buildup of Centro. Is there any sort of insight into like the ideological makeup of Centro? Like, what do we see there?
Yeah, there's a lot of Marxism. I mean, really, the real like leftist Marxist roots of Centro come through very strongly in those early records. As I mentioned, intentionality. There's lots of documentation there, really spelling out the principles of what Centro was being built upon,
Sure.
The ethos that was going on. I also think that it's really incredible to pair these documents with all the photographs of what early Centro looked like,
Right.
in Centro through the years, and kind of what our spaces looked like. Centro wasn't always here in the Silberman building. In East Harlem, we originally were at John Jay College. We were part of CUNY Central briefly. We were on the main campus of Hunter. So Centro as an entity really comes out of a larger CUNY entity. And I think that those significant places in which it went helped kind of add momentum. It took something from every place that it was located, eventually coming, the Library and Archives is now here in East Harlem, which definitely has an impact on how we view ourselves and how we interact with the community. And that's documented throughout the papers, as well as seeing all those images of early staff looking at what the collaborations looked like. We had a wonderful exchange program with the University of Puerto Rico, and that's heavily documented. I think one of the areas that's most incredibly documented in the collection.
Yeah.
So do we want to share the screen now?
Yeah, definitely. So we're gonna go ahead and show you how scholars and the general public can access the Centro papers. So what you should be seeing on the screen now is our archival database with the finding aid for the Center for Puerto Rican Studies records open. So Lindsay, walk us through this a little bit.
Sure. So to get to this page, if you use this little icon, or if you're on the landing page of our digital collections, or I'm sorry, our archival collections database, you can just search Centro Records or Center for Puerto Rican Studies.
And if Camacho, can you please put the link to this in the chat so people can follow along if they'd like?
So this is the finding aid for the Centro Records. We have a lot of really great data in the administrative information. So like the scope and content provides, a general sense of what you'll find in the collection. What I think is really incredible is the historical note, which is a really extensive history of Centro that goes on and on and on, that goes up to the early 2000s. We have, key information like chronology of directors, locations, events. And this kind of pairs nicely with the timeline that we have on our website that documents the history of Centro with a little more interactiveness. So we can see right now, it's 135 cubic feet roughly. We actually have a lot more information from the last 20 or so years that we're adding to the collection to build it up. But we have the arrangement of it all.
I think that's something good to note is that this is a growing collection. So as Centro continues to grow and develop, we will continue adding to the collection since the history of Centro continues.
Yes, and it's definitely, I think, going to take some really interesting, it's not going to all be physical. There's so much in the last 20 years that's going to be digital, which will also be available through our digital collections. So I think the benefit of that is there's going to just be so much more increased access to material. Yeah,
a lot of born digital material that is going to be processed through our various workstations and then be made available online. So Lindsay, the collection organization, can you walk us through a little bit of the collection, how it's organized?
Sure. So I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We have the papers of the various directors. So those are specific to the work of the directors. The steering committee and the general area are really the fascinating ones. The steering committee is kind of what founded CENTRO. So a lot of those documentations, those early documentation I was talking about,
Right.
but a steering committee existed until the late 90s, specifically to kind of help navigate what CENTRO was.
Yeah, and prior to Centro, there was a committee for the creation of a Center for Puerto Rican Studies.
Yeah. So then I think one of the most fascinating and rich areas are the task forces. So these are the task forces that existed with Centro's founding, and they have just tons of great documentation of how they were administered, how they functioned, interacted with funders like Ford Foundation and Mellon, as well as a lot of what they produced.
Mm-hmm.
I know we brought this up. We had a group of scholars come in from the Mellon grant that we have now, Bridging the Divide, and they looked at the CENTRO records. And I feel like even our director was fascinated by what she found and some of the records, especially because a number of these task forces look at areas that people may not be looking at as closely now, or may have not realized were kind of part of Puerto Rican studies. Particularly, I know the prison task force is something that people are kind of surprised about, but very interested in, and it has a lot of information. I'm also going to show you, if I go to the main page of I'm going to also bounce over to our digital collections in the interest of time. So this is in our digital collections portal, and Camacho can put the link in the chat for this as well. So the CENTRO records in both our digital collections and in our archival collections also have like many different collections that are part of the CENTRO records, but have their own distinct sub-collection essentially. So all our oral history projects get their own collection page. And so we have them all listed here. One in particular that I think is really fascinating is this Extended Roots conference that CENTRO held in the mid 80s. And we have the entire conference, basically all the talks in the conference digitized from audio cassette tapes, as well as a whole oral history workshop that occurred. So this is one of the things that we have really well documented with some timestamps, key people, information, and then we have all the links to the other related items associated with it. And what's also great, and what I used to help inform me on this when I was cataloging it, is we have the entire transcript as part of one of those reports that Enable had. So a lot of these were heavily informed by the products that CENTRO made that allowed us to enrich our cataloging and really bring a lot more information to the records to help people jump into them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can listen to it in its entirety. And, you know, for a long time, these were really not available anywhere. Like these were really just put online in the last couple of years, right? So there was a lot of scholarship that happened. Thankfully, our former colleagues at Centro saw fit to record all of that so that it can be safe for posterity. And now scholars and anyone interested in the Puerto Rican studies or the history of Centro can benefit from the fact that these recordings are made available online. Lindsay, there are also a lot of collections at Centro that are related to the Centro records. I know just off the top of my head, there's like Luiso Reyes, who's a member of the Regents of New York State, the Board of Regents. He was heavily impactful in the struggle for bilingual education. What other collections would you say are linked to Centro records?
Sure. We actually have the Frank Bonilla papers. So Frank Bonilla was the first director of Centro. He was the director for 20 years. And he was key in kind of setting the agenda and helping, of course, with a steering committee to set the stage for what Centro would become. But he definitely had a incredibly powerful hand in shaping the early years of Centro and setting us up for success. And we have his papers that expand beyond what he did at Centro. So we have his director papers in the Centro records, and then we have kind of his additional work outside of being the Centro director on site that definitely speaks to his time at Stanford and the things he did outside of Centro to impact the field of Puerto Rican studies.
we're gonna just talk for a few
Yeah.
more minutes before we turn over to Phil. But one of the things I want to highlight is the fact that Centro is celebrating its 50th anniversary,
Mhm.
and I think part of that celebration of 50 years is some introspection that we did as a staff, and also as an organization. A lot of what we did was reflect upon what had happened in the 50 years leading up to the present. And I would say that there's a ton of material that was drawn from the Centro archive, the Centro records, to do our 50th anniversary programming. So simple things like the type of images that you might put on a postcard, to images that went into our that really great timeline that exists on our website. And we also use the Centro records to inform the future, right? So that part of the philosophy of Centro now is a retrofuturist philosophy. So if you go to our website, you see that the colors and the fonts and the design is informed by previous Centro publications. And that's the only things that we can do because our former colleagues were so diligent in their record keeping and the keeping of these materials so that we can benefit from them here in the present. Lindsay, anything you'd like to add about the Centro records before we let Phil talk a little bit?
Sure. I'll just, in kind of closing on this, I would just say that I think, for us, they're so powerful. They're our institutional records, but I do think that they have a much wider reach in terms of how organizations get founded and developed and funded. It speaks to the larger student movements going on in the late 1960s and early 70s. It also speaks to, a CUNY-wide, like how does something get established at CUNY? And I know that there's been so many other wonderful institutes that have followed in our footsteps. And I think a lot of the reason that we've been able to help them, like the Dominican studies and Mexican studies, is because we have these documents that aren't specific to, Puerto Rican studies, but are specific to like ethnic studies and founding a organization that has a really strong and specific mission and how to carry that out.
And we definitely can't deny the fact that the reason that Centro has had so much success has been because of our parent institution at Hunter College. And Hunter College and Centro are inextricably linked. Centro is part of the history of Hunter College. And Phil is here to talk to us a little bit about what he does at Hunter College and the collections there at Hunter College. So Phil, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, the Hunter Archives was established in 1966, so it was not the college itself has been around since 1870. So the archive started, and I think it was in part connected to the 100th anniversary of the college when that came about. And as a institutional archives, there's obviously a focus on the administration of the college, the different departments in the college, the faculty, the staff, and student organizations. So that's our primary focus. And again, the records do go back to when the college started, actually a little before. I think the earliest records we have for Hunter are 1869. So that's quite a wide range. In terms of the requests that we get a lot of requests from staff in the president's office. Whenever we have something where we're contacting alumni or different things that happen in different administrations, we have a lot of interaction with the president's office. Again, alumni relations. So we get a lot of requests for when distinguished alums pass away or different alums. Families get in touch with us where they want to donate their records. We have a lot of interaction with that. Institutional development's a big part of it. When we're money raising campaign or something that has to involve history under college, and they want photographs and background information, we step in there. We've recently had some significant donations. One of them, our president, Jennifer Robb, is retiring. And so we have her records, which comes out to, it's about 100 boxes worth of papers. And there's going to be a lot more in terms of electronic records. She's been the president from 2000 to today, so 23 years. And the paper records only go up to 2008. So there's literally decades of things that are all electronic, which is another
Phil,
discussion
I
about
have a quick
archives.
question.
Yeah.
Is Jennifer, was she the longest serving president at Hunter College?
No, I think George Schuster was.
Okay.
Yeah, she might be. I don't know. She might be. He was, which I was going to mention him in a minute. He's from 1940 to 1960, I believe. So I hadn't really thought about it, but she might actually be the longest serving president. Yeah, he's 40 to 60. So yeah, actually, yeah, she might be the longest serving.
Wow.
Maybe Thomas Hunter might have been longer. I have to see what his reign was.
I didn't mean to derail you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, but I think, part of the issue, which is another archives discussion, is for contemporary people, as with all of us, most of our records now are in emails and files and things like that. So she's really the first president when the majority of her records are electronic, and we're trying to figure out how to incorporate that into the archives. And so it's something that we're learning, but it's in different people have more experience with that. Another significant gift we just received was from the estate of Gertrude Elion, who is a faculty member here. She was a chemist and actually won the Nobel Prize. And so her family actually donated the actual Nobel medal, which isn't secured. It's not in the archives. We actually have that. The dress she wore when she received a Nobel Prize, and then her papers. So it's kind of an interesting collection that we still need to process, but I think there'll be a lot of interest from researchers. We have a lot of donations, like many of us during COVID, things shut down. And so we have 287 feet of unprocessed materials right now. So we've got a big backlog of donated papers. And I don't know how familiar everybody is with archives here, but by processing, I mean, going through raw records of stuff, from attics and drawers and where were people, filing cabinets, and actually making sense of it, deciding what to keep, what to discard, and how to organize it. So there's work for many years to come to work on that. In terms of our most used collections, the most used is definitely the Alumni Association. So again, we're a big facet for the alums, and a lot of it is even yearbook pictures. A big part of our requests are either a yearbook of when I graduated, or more likely when my mother, my grandmother, graduated, and so we get a lot of information about that. A lot of times they also want to know what grades did they get, what classes. We don't have that information, but we can tell what clubs they were in, and the information we have that way. There's a lot of interest in different Hunter College publications. We actually have a lot of people who are interested in course catalog information from the past. If they have to, for a job, describe what courses they took, in 1993, and it's been a while and they can't remember what they were exactly. We can give them that information. A lot of interest in different student clubs and organizations through the years. So that, and that's something that we're really trying to encourage students today to donate records from their clubs. Sometimes they think, I had one student say, well, we're in an ultimate Frisbee club, would that count? And I said, sure, absolutely. I mean, a lot of students think maybe our club, or it might be Dungeons and Dragons club or whatever. They don't think we, want it. But, I make the point, I mean, the ultimate Frisbee, 100 years from now, they probably not going to know what that means. And they'd be interested about what do students do for recreation. So sure, donate that. That's great. In terms of the more scholarly collections, we get a lot of use of the Lenox Hill Neighborhood House collection. So Lenox Hill was a neighborhood assistance program. Started actually as a kindergarten. Hunter was originally called the Normal College, and it was a training school for teachers. And so there was a kindergarten, and then that grew into the Lenox Hill House. And as I tell students, this neighborhood where we are, the Upper East Side, obviously it's probably the most wealthy neighborhoods in the world. But at the turn of the century, it was not. There was a lot of poverty here, and so it was a different population, and it was primarily known as Yorkville. It still is to a certain extent, but I think it's kind of gone away. It's mostly the Upper East Side people think of it. So we have a lot of records for that, and the different outreach that went out from Lenox Hill over the years. Another really popular, we get to the president, is George Schuster. So he was a really fascinating president of Hunter from 1940 to 1960. So during the war years, a really innovative person. One of the collections we're working on right now that he's involved with, he was really involved with the Hunter Symphony Orchestra and inviting very famous performers from around the world. So it's really unbelievable. You know, in the 1940s, 50s, we had every major, you know, from Marian Anderson to Vladimir Horowitz, and I mean, basically every major name. It's kind of stunning, the people that we got to come to campus. Thomas Mann, the author, spoke here. Yeah, it's really amazing. So he really was, really made us prominent in terms of the international aspect. And, another big collection is Jacqueline Wexler. And she was our first woman as president from 1970 to 1979. And she was, which I'll talk about in a second, involved with the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies when that came about in 1969. So obviously Thomas Hunter is a big deal, the founder of the college. And the last thing is the records of the Women's City Club of New York, which actually wasn't part of Hunter. But we received their papers, and they began as a suffragette club in 1915, and so they're still in existence today. And then they've been big advocates for women's rights through the years. So we get a lot of requests for that, and it ties into Hunter and the fact that we've been traditionally been a women's college, so and a big part of women's history in New York City. In terms of current initiatives, what we're working on right now, because again, we're kind of coming back to life after COVID, we are transferring our finding aids into archive space. And I know that CENTRO is way ahead of us on that, but it's really important that we have our finding aids searchable and available online. So that's a big thing what we're doing, but it's very time consuming. There's no quick way to do it, as you know. So, it's just a lot of data processing, but hopefully we'll get the majority of it done by the end of the year. Again, as I said, we have a lot of unprocessed collections that we have to go through. We want to digitize a lot of our documents. Again, ideally all of and we're getting there, but all of our yearbooks should be digitized. So the people, they do want to look at a picture of their grandmother who went here in 1953, that they can just look at it themselves. They don't have to wait for us to scan a picture or something like that. So, different publications that the students put out, different student clubs, we're working on that. We definitely, the archives has just moved to a different part of the library. So we're actually we're still kind of putting our act together here. So we're not officially open yet, but we hope it will be next week. But we would like to have more exhibition space. We definitely want to collaborate with CENTRO and different departments and bring them in more frequently. We'd like to start maybe more social media engagement, as hasn't been something we've really done, but something that we would like to do. Just kind of updating our best practices in the archives and kind of bringing it up to date with current standards. I would also, so I thought in what we're talking about here, one thing you might be interested in, we do have the records for the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies, which became Africana and Puerto Rican Latino Studies. So we have records for that from 1970 to 1999. So we have it from when it started. Again, that was during Jacqueline Wexler's presidency. The records are donated by the former chair of the department, Jose Manuel Santiago Torres. And the main significance, I think, of the collection, for people who are interested in doing research, besides finding out more about the faculty and things like that, is that it impacted the curriculum. After that department was created, students are required to take specific courses from the department to fulfill distribution requirements. So, it really brought to the fore the history of the Black and Puerto Rican studies. The collection is not huge; it's 9 boxes, so it's manageable. So that's something that might be of interest to our audience. So, and so I can take any questions or talk with you guys, but that's kind of an overview, and hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're doing. So.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Phil. I can definitely, Lindsay and I were kind of looking at each other and nodding agreeingly about some of the challenges that you face and some of the projects that you're undertaking. So yeah, and I can't imagine doing a big move like that is really jarring as well. And thank you for sharing that information about the Department of Black and Africana Studies and Puerto Rican Studies. that also, yeah, that coincides nicely with the work that Centro's done. And I do believe we have a question.
Yes.
Can you talk about the records of Donna Shalala, who brought Centro to Hunter? Phil, do you have anything? Do you know anything off the top of your head about Donna Shalala?
Yeah, we have her records. She let me see if I can pull that up. Yeah, Donna Shalala was the president, I believe, in the 80s. And let me pull it up. She actually, it was significant about her besides being Hunter. She actually then went to work in the Clinton administration. So she was, let me pull this up here. Donna Shalala, so 1980 to 1988. So pretty much, most of the 80s. I mean, it's going to focus on her time at Hunter. So it's not going to be about when she left for the Clinton administration. Let me see if I can find out what her, yeah, in January 93, Shalala was appointed by President Bill Clinton to be the U.S. Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. But yeah, so she, she ended here shortly before she went to the Clinton White House. But yeah, we have her record here. I don't know how much involvement. I personally, I'd have to see in terms of Black and Puerto Rican Studies program. But there was already existence when she came. But I'd have to do. I don't have it off the top of my head about how involved she was or how she interacted with it. But once we are open, which should be soon. And we do, the finding aid is available online. So if you go to the archives webpage for Hunter and you go to finding aids and you pick president's collections, you can look and see what we have for her papers, and you might find something in there that would be of interest.
Can you speak a little bit about how the public might gain access to material that is held at the Hunter Archive?
Well, you can visit campus. If you're not associated with Hunter, you just need to get a visitor's pass, and you can give me a heads up if you wanted to come by, and we could get that set up with public safety. Everything with the archives, whether you're a Hunter person or not, you do have to make an appointment, so we have some idea rather than just like a normal library, just walking off the street. So again, let me give you the library or the archives page. The archives is library.hunter.cuny.edu/archives. And if you go to that page, one of the links is for a research request form, and that's basically just fill in what you're interested in, when you'd be coming by, and that way we can prepare. Because again, part of the idea is that we're prepared, and part of it is if we don't have what you're looking for, there's no sense in you making the trip in. There's really no way to know until we actually look at it. So that's how it's different from a regular. We can tell you if we have a library book here easily, but we can't tell you if we have a certain letter from somebody, that in one of the collections. So it's to save you time. Yeah.
I mean, that's like the nature of working with an archive is, most archives don't catalog everything down to the item level. So you'll get an idea that it might exist within a certain series. And I encounter this every single day, working when I do reference with people that want to use our archival resources. Part of it is explaining to people how working with archival material and doing archival research is quite distinct than just going to a library and getting call numbers or getting articles off of databases. Honestly, the way I always look at it is that it's part of the fun, is that, there is a bit of mystery when you go into a specific box or folder, that you have an idea of what you're looking for, but whether or not it's there, that's incumbent on the individual researcher to go, page by page and find either that specific letter that you're looking for. And it can be either super fruitful or, very frustrating. And it's just the nature of the types of research that we do. But what we're doing and what Lindsay and I are doing at Centro, and what Phil is doing with his staff over at Hunter College, is that we're increasingly making a lot of these finding aids and material available online, so that it does make the job a little easier than it was even in the more recent past. Phil, are there any, what would you say are some challenges that you are envisioning coming up in the next few years for the Hunter College Archive?
Well, I think one of them is just space. We moved into a space that's smaller than where we were, and we keep getting donations. I'm going to meet with the art department in a few weeks, and they have a lot of papers they want to donate. So, and it's just keeping up with the, it's like the cliche of the Lucy episode where there's a conveyor belt with things that she's working. Yeah, I mean, we just have, and people are nice, but we just have a constant influx of, would you want my grandmother's scrapbook? And we do, but we're not the National Archives where we have, a warehouse somewhere. So we will have to figure out where to put everything. But it's a good problem to have. But I do feel like it's looming over us that there's just so much stuff that we have. And if it's not processed and there's no finding aid, we might as well not have it because people have no idea what's there. So it's, we have to keep at it. So
findability, accessibility, those are very, very familiar challenges here at CENTRO. We're not so different.
So we do have one more question. And it's talking about CENTRO and Hunter Archive hosting classes in the archives. And if we could talk a little bit about the kind of courses that connect with us and our materials. And we have like 2 minutes just to like give fair warning so we can, 5 minutes. So in terms of the CENTRO archives, I can jump in first. We've had a lot of classes come in. Anibal tends to do that, but in terms of what they're connecting with, we've gotten to pull some really amazing collections, like a lot of our New Yorican poets and writers and people involved in the New Yorican movement collections tend to be really fascinating to students. We really love to be able to pull a bunch of boxes and allow the students to dive in and kind of just have fun in the archives and discover things and make their own connections and interpretations. And I know that we found working with professors and allowing them to help us direct the type of material that they're looking for and provide some of that broad framework allows us to then just say, have fun and discover. And I think that freedom has really, instead of being a very, very directed, program, when we bring them in, we give them an overview of what CENTRO is and a little bit of history of Puerto Rican studies in Puerto Rico, in the United States. But once we allow them to dive into the archives, I feel like they really come alive and get really connected to the material, make connections between their classes that they're taking, maybe outside of the class they're coming for even, between themselves personally. We always have at least 1 or 2 students who have just a really deep personal connection and find the material incredibly fascinating, touching.
So in terms of the types of classes that come and visit, we definitely have had classes from the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department at Hunter College, the English department. What they love coming in and learning about playwrights and New Yorican playwrights and New Yorican poets. We've had classes from universities from like NYU that they come in and they want to learn about Pura Verpre and they want to learn about those early Puerto Rican communities from the 1920s that settled in New York City. And just the general process is if you or someone that wants to bring a class to CENTRO, you contact our email, centro.library@hunter.cuny.edu, and you tell us a little bit about the class that you're teaching and about some subject areas of interest that you would like your students to see, and then we can make a nice it was like a field trip. They come in and get hands-on with the material. Bill, what are your experiences with bringing students into the archive?
Are we good on time? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple more minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was different things we've had. We had an English professor, Wendy Heaton, who had brought students in to blog about their experiences in the archives doing primary source research. We've had a couple of faculty, including Julie, who is in the audience today from Romance Languages, have used the archives. One was looking at materials that relate to students who were involved during the Spanish Civil War. Julie worked with students translating issues of Iride, which I'm probably mangling that, an Italian language literary magazine published by Hunter College Italian Club from 1934 to 1940. We had DeWeston Haywood of history, brought a class in to use the archives as part of his History 290 course, which is a practicum designed to train students in historical methods and research. So we'd like to bring in more history for that matter. I teach a course, Library 100, and so we always use primary sources in the archives as a central part of the research process, and I have them go from there to using secondary sources. And then this past semester, we had another history professor who had a really interesting assignment. It was a 300 level class where each student was assigned someone from the Hunter College Hall of Fame. And so then they had to find out information about that person and write a final report about it. So it's really been across the board. It's been history, it's been Romance language, it's been English. So, it's not just history people coming in.
Yeah. How do we get those STEM students to come in and use the archive?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, maybe with Gertrude Elion with the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, they might. I mean, that might be the hook. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. Unfortunately, our time is up for today. Again, this was an overview on the CENTRO records and also the Hunter College archives. Again, we are deeply thankful to Hunter College as our host institution, and we're looking forward to collaborating with you in the future, Phil, in order to share the different resources that we have here at Centro and make it known to the faculty. Thanks to everyone for joining us. And again, this will be available on YouTube on our Centro PR YouTube channel for anyone that couldn't make it today. Phil, thank you very much for taking your lunch hour to come hang out with us, just to discuss a little bit about the work that you do and the collections, the very interesting collections that you have over there. And so thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.